As a child of the 80s and 90s, I practically grew up on Roseanne. So last night when the finale of The Conners happened, I had a lot of conflicting feelings. Like, on the one hand, the show has not been what I would make it to be. It hasn't done a lot of the things that I would have liked to have seen it done. But that said, it has also managed to recover really well from having a pretty weak first season, from losing Roseanne, from all of those things. And they've managed to make it work better than I actually ever expected them to. So whilst it wasn't a show that I would make time out of my day to watch, it's a show that when my parents had it on, I would make sure that I would stay in the room, I would pay attention to what was happening more than a lot of the other shows that they watch. Now, what I will say is that the final season has been plagued with the problem that a lot of final seasons, and honestly just seasons of shows in general have nowadays, where it's like a lot of hem and haw and a lot of nonsense, a lot of not really making a lot of progress, and then the very last episode of the series or the season, we finally have all of the payoff, all of the response, all of the reaction, all of that jazz. And by and large, I'm pretty happy with where most of the characters ended up, but there's one character that I have a huge problem with where she ended up. So first off, I'm really happy with what they did with Dan, especially like, I was really worried in the lead up to this episode that they were going to do another windfall. It's something that the producers have actually come out and said that like, this whole show was trying to correct the fact that in the original series, Roseanne, there was like a lottery winnings and all of that jazz that ended up getting written off, and it was really bad. It was like Beverly Hillbillies meets Roseanne in the worst possible way, taking the worst possible tropes of each show, and it really was kind of like when the show jumped the shark initially, so I understand why the producers wanted to kind of fix that with the Conners. So while yes, I am happy that he managed to get a check out of it because his words were impassioned. That scene where he's talking to the lawyers, it was really an emotionally evocative scene. It really covered a lot of like feelings that I felt have kind of been pent up about the characters. Like, a lot of this episode was just, when Roseanne died, the like grieving process was handled kind of weirdly, and it almost felt like, I don't think we've seen the gravesite. Like I said, I don't watch every single episode, but I don't think we've ever seen them go to the gravesite, have we? And this time, when they were at the gravesite, it felt like the first time that they were at the gravesite, because a lot of the things that they were telling Roseanne, dead Roseanne, spirit Roseanne, were things that had happened seasons ago. And it's like, has it been literally years since did you never go to the gravesite? Like, what is going on here? But that said, I am glad that his words, his emotionally evocative words, had some sort of stirring in these people, but I'm really glad that they didn't go the direction that they did the last time and have it be a huge windfall and have it be a huge thing that really changed their financial standing. Also, I saw in an article that the producers wanted it to be semi-realistic, and like, people that are actually in that position very seldomly get enough money for it to be life-changing. Like we saw the lawyers in that episode, they were really trying to make every single part of Roseanne's death about her and her actions and things of that nature, whereas frankly, if she would have never started taking the pills, she would have never gotten addicted. And if she would have never gotten addicted, she would have never died. It was a really good example of why common people have a hard time holding companies accountable, though, because those lawyers are going to look for every little thing that they can point on the victim. It is just very formalized victim blaming. I've been kind of overall with Katey Sagal. I think she plays Louise. I don't even remember her character's name. That shows how much of an impact she's made on me. In my opinion, Louise has kind of been like an ups and downs character. I feel like, I don't know, she isn't like fully integrated, and I kind of think that this end episode kind of addressed the fact that she hadn't really been fully integrated. She didn't really fully feel like a member of the family, and this episode really kind of like dug in that truth. Like, hey, there are these things that make her feel alienated. There are these things that make her feel isolated from the rest of the family and things of that nature. I do think that if they would have cast literally anyone else in that role, that the fans would have revolted. I think having Katey Sagal, somebody who was from another famous 80s and 90s sitcom, Married with Children, is one of the few people that anybody would have accepted in that role. And whilst I didn't necessarily love the decision at first, and I don't always love the way they've handled the character, I do think that she was good for Dan's growth. And I think that's one of the things that I have against a lot of her character. She feels like a female character that has been put in place solely to lead to growth and healing of the main character. And yes, she has had her own plot lines of her own, but like the end just almost kind of hammered in for me her feeling like an afterthought, her feeling like a later addition. And you know, realistically, that's fine, because that's what her character is. Now let's talk about Becky. Becky is one of the characters that I think actually had the greatest development as a character throughout the course of this show. She has struggled with a lot of things in the past. She has struggled financially in the past. She struggled with going back to school, but now she's got a degree and she's got a job, and that job pays well, and she has a man who actually seems to have emotional intelligence. And I don't always love her and, what is his name, Don? His name is Don. Patton Oswalt. I keep calling him Patton Oswalt because it's played by Patton Oswalt, and I don't 100% jive with every aspect of their relationship, and I don't fully think they really addressed the financial disparity, the way that they were handling finances between the two of them very well in that last episode. I would have liked the plot about them pooling their finances and them deciding how they feel about things like getting a house together versus getting a new vehicle of your very own for the first time. Those are big discussions that could have been really interesting points of episodes that didn't have that much interest. I also think that it would have just been another opportunity for both her and Don and everyone around them to kind of grow and adjust and change and to kind of get used to the new situation with them. Everything with them was it was like the final nails were being hammered into the house as people were moving in. It wasn't necessarily the way I like things to be done, personally. And I do love that Becky is being rewarded with some semblance of financial security and also relationship security, because that's something so very rare in this show in a lot of ways. Now let's talk about Jackie, because Jackie was one of my favorite characters as a kid, and one of my big criticisms with her in the original show was just she became a caricature of herself. And I think that that was kind of sustained into the Connors a little bit as well. She's kind of mellowed out a little bit towards the later seasons, but especially initially I felt like that she was just a massive caricature of herself. But her big story for a while now is just she once was a cop. Was she kicked off the force? I think she was kicked off the force, but don't quote me on that. She's no longer with the force, and then she wanted to rejoin the force at her, she's got to be in her 60s at this point, because Darlene's actress is 50. She's rather older than you would expect somebody to be going through the police training course, but you know what? We'll allow it. And I really thought her plotline this season was going to culminate in her failing the test and her not being able to be a cop again, and her realizing that just because she doesn't have that avenue anymore, just because that path has been shut off, doesn't mean that she doesn't have all of these other things that she's interested in, all of these other values, all of these other things that she can do with herself. I do love that she's married and she's happy now, because I really think that her character kind of got the short end of the stick with that in the original series, Roseanne. I more or less what is her husband's name? Neville. Her husband isn't around enough for me to remember his name or for him to bother me, which is realistically better than a lot of the characters. That's mean. Better than one of the characters on the show. We'll go there. So next, let's talk about Mark. Mark has been one of the characters that I actually really like, and one of the things that has frustrated me about his storyline this season is just all of the sacrifices that Darlene made and the way it paid out and everything, and we'll get to Darlene in a second. I do think that, putting that stuff aside for a moment, because like I said, we're going to discuss it, that I do like the way his storyline played out. I do think I would have liked to see a little bit more of this process of him getting this cybersecurity job. I would have liked to have spent more of this season seeing him in the pursuit of this cybersecurity job. I look at some of the other things that we saw this season and I'm like, why couldn't we have spent this season him going through this interview that he has with this company, him doing the 6 weeks of training with this company, him having struggles with this training, or maybe him excelling at this training, and then at the end him going off for the job. All of the stuff about the interview and the training and the job and all of that, it was just last second, oh crap, we need to wrap up his plot line and we need to do it quick. I just really wonder why so much of this stuff had to wait to the final 2 episodes. Harris didn't really show up that much over these 2 episodes, but realistically, she's been kind of steady and stable in what she's doing, which is running Roseanne's old cafe restaurant, whatever you want to call it, running that restaurant and getting it better. And she's one of the few characters who, like, I really feel like has had a good amount of development. She is one of the characters that I really liked the most out of all of the characters that are newly introduced for this series. I mean, I guess she's not technically newly added for this, but she was a literal baby infant when the show was originally out. So, like, it wasn't like she was really there in any meaningful way and having a personality and things like that. Speaking of characters that just sort of disappeared, Becky has a baby. Beverly Rose, who I think was in one episode that I saw this season, I think she was like coloring at the table. Her character really kind of got written down. Who was watching Beverly Rose when all of them were at the cemetery opening up this $700 check? DJ didn't get mentioned at all. His character got written off seasons ago, but I still thought that he might get a mention or something, but no, not at all. Honestly, with everybody else's character and all the other stuff going on, I don't necessarily know when they would have fitted in. I mean, they may have just figured out, like, what we have explained him doing earlier is good enough for him for now. That's fine. We'll just leave him that way. Speaking about characters that went missing, they did address the fact that Beverly, the mother of Roseanne and Jackie, she was just on a train the last time we saw her, and we haven't seen her in a while now. But realistically, the reason that she didn't come back is because the actress that plays her is 97-ish years old and probably has things that she would like to do other than being on a set for a while. Now let's discuss Darlene, because Darlene is realistically the biggest thing that has prevented me from actually glomming onto the Connors the way I wish I could have. And I didn't really understand the reason for that until my parents and I rewatched the original Roseanne show over this past summer. And one of the things that I paid attention to, because I loved Darlene growing up, I wanted to be Darlene growing up. She was one of the first characters that was like a sarcastic young girl. And as a sarcastic young girl, it was one of the few characters I had other than Daria that I could relate to. And there is just so much that I feel relatable in Darlene. So she's a character that, like, I personally have a little bit too much of an unhealthy attachment with. I will fully admit that. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. So much of the original show, Roseanne, was about, oh my God, we can't let this happen. We can't let this happen, because if we let this happen, Darlene is going to have the same fate that we are. If we don't stop this, Darlene is going to have the same fate. There were like probably over 10 episodes where an integral point of the episode is that if something bad happens, if this one specific thing or these multiple specific things happen, then it is over for Darlene's future, that there's nothing that she can do, that she's just going to be damned to the same path that the rest of the family has fallen to. Darlene was viewed as the one character that was so smart. She had all of this potential. She had all of these things going for her, so we couldn't compromise that because she needed to live her dream. So much of the original show, Roseanne, is about Roseanne and Dan putting their needs, their desires, things like that on hold so their kids, hypothetically, can have some semblance of a better future. And I do understand that the nature of the cycle is that it is hard to escape from, that it is hard to make progress if you don't come from money ultimately. But also, there are ways that you could show progress in Darlene and also show that the struggle of being working class is hard. But very often you had, one of the things that frustrated me about this show, and I didn't watch for like a season, was when she decided that she was going to be a cafeteria lunch lady so that her son could get, you know, discount tuition or whatever the crap the plan was. Why couldn't it be something like, oh, I'm going to get this job as a cafeteria lunch lady, and since this isn't going to require all of my intelligence, this isn't going to require all of my brain time all the time, I'm going to take advantage of my shifts and plan like a book or a story or a novel or something that I will then, in my free time, put a little bit of work to. Darlene's ending for this season and for this series is just, oh hey, that man that you're married to that hasn't paid attention to you in episodes, he actually does care about you. Don't go off and cheat with Seth Green's character. So much more could have and should have been done. You don't even have to do something crazy. Like I said, she had gone to be a cafeteria lunch lady because of Mark. If Mark isn't going to finish college, and if Mark doesn't need that education, doesn't need that discount anymore, what is she going to do with herself? Why is the only part of her life that gets addressed in the final episode this relationship with Ben? Why couldn't they bring it full circle? Because Roseanne really wanted to write a novel or write a story or something of that nature, and that was like a big plot in the original series about how she had an office down in the basement where she was going to write her book or whatever. Why couldn't the final episode ended with Darlene sitting down at a computer and starting to type out her life story or her mom's life story or what happened to her? Like, there are so many ways that this could have been turned into a final personal development moment for Darlene. But the whole original series of Roseanne is completely worthless because Darlene just followed in exactly the same footsteps. Darlene ended up exactly back where she started. Okay, sure, she's got a husband now who I don't care for, who I don't really like that much, who I think is the example of the typical mediocrity that a lot of women end up in relationships with. Why couldn't she demand better? Why couldn't she end up with better in any way? She's just like, oh, I mean, I guess my kids are happy, but, you know, one of my kids is going off to New York. What? Where is, like, any type of satisfying ending about her and her needs and her wants and her interests? Why is it just about all of the people around her? And like that ultimately is why I think I will never rewatch the show The Conners. Like, I just don't think it was anywhere near as funny as the Roseanne series was, and also it just didn't have the same gratification. But sadly, The Conners has ruined Roseanne a little bit for me, because all of those episodes where the stakes are Darlene's entire future, You shouldn't have bothered, Roseanne. All of that effort, all of that work, all of those things you cast aside for Darlene, she just did the exact same things. Nothing changed in the cycle. There are ways they could have developed the cycle to make it look better. And they didn't, and I hate them for it. So it turns out that when I went up to the house to go to the bathroom, I kind of got my lav mic stuck on something and I broke it, so we're just gonna have to go with this for the rest of the video. It shouldn't be too much longer, though. One of the things that I was really happy with was the way they chose to end the show. It's clear that this scene was either the last one they filmed or one of the last ones they filmed. Like, you could tell when Jackie was leaving, when Jackie was saying goodbye, that she wasn't saying, like, goodbye, I'm gonna see you tomorrow. There was tears in her eyes, and it really seemed like as soon as Jackie's actress, God, whose name is completely escaping me right now, but whatever. As soon as Jackie's actress started crying, it really seemed to open the waterworks, and everyone else, even Dan, had a little bit of red-rimmed eyes as we came to the end, and then it finished up with just scenes of them together. I was kind of expecting that we were going to see a little bit of Roseanne in some of the clips that they played from the original series. They did not include her in any of those. They did include DJ, though, so I thought that was interesting. And honestly, I wonder if they just didn't use Roseanne because they have to pay her every time they use her image, and they didn't want to go through that, especially the way Roseanne Barr, whatever she's going by nowadays, and Roseanne Barr, eternally in my own mind, is, you know, she's not necessarily... Roseanne has gone a direction that I think a lot of people can't necessarily abide, and I think it would have kind of been a smear on the show. After getting rid of her, after making a stand about it in that sort of way, doing something that would cause her to get any type of payout kind of seems contrary to the vision. And also, I feel like they wrapped up the episode really well without her. Like I said, when we kind of came back from the Conners, like when it became the Conners because Roseanne had been fired / the character had passed on, it really felt like they didn't want to bog down the show by having it be like too depressing or anything. And one thing that I do have to give the show credit for is the way that it adapted to that curveball of having a main character, the character that the show is named after, a character that is associated with a person who did a lot of the writing on the earlier seasons. Although honestly, I think once Roseanne herself got like actually properly rich, she kind of lost touch with actual working class people's struggles. One of the issues that I have with the later seasons of Roseanne is just like, it's poor people but written by people that are clearly rich, because it's not the decision-making processes that I think a lot of people that don't have a lot of money would go through. It's not the decisions that I think a lot of those people would make. To be able to undo those end seasons of Roseanne that weren't very good, to give the show a little bit better of an ending that felt a lot more satisfying this time around. Like, when we rewatched Roseanne this summer and I saw the original ending, I'm like, yeah, okay, well, I mean, that's an ending. This at least feels like a more proper tribute to those characters. And even it does feel like a more appropriate tribute to Roseanne, the character, as well, because we're not just trying to like hurry through the grieving process so your comedy show isn't just people mourning for a bunch of episodes. Like, I understand why they made the decision they did when they wrote off that character, right? I understand why they didn't focus on it as much or as long or have it be as predominant a theme in a lot of the episodes for a variety of reasons. But also, I can acknowledge that, like, there is a part of me that has wanted to see these characters come to closure. There's a part of me that does not feel like a lot of these characters had closure about Roseanne's death, like, especially Dan. Even after Dan moved on with Katie Seagal's character, it really felt like there was just this absence of closure. And maybe it is more realistic this way, right? Maybe it is more realistic for it to take years for these family to come to terms with losing their matriarch, because Honestly, we very often act like grieving is nowhere near as bad as it actually is. Grieving is very difficult. Grieving is very painful. Grieving takes a lot of time. It can often take many years to fully go through the process of grieving somebody that you're truly close to, especially somebody that you were married to for 40 years, somebody who is a parent, someone who is a beloved parent at that. I absolutely do think that it's interesting how this came around with like how they kind of put off the full closure of Roseanne to the very end. And it does feel like the point where the family no longer needs us anymore. Like as the family handled the loss of Roseanne, there was this absence, and that was an absence that in a lot of ways that was fulfilled by the audience. Now that these characters have more fully processed their grief, they don't need us anymore. They can go off and be their own people. But did you watch the finale? If so, what did you think? Do you think you're ever going to go back and rewatch The Conners? My name is AerinMoriarty, and I discuss pop culture, pop media, and pop music, among other things. I do a lot of discussion about Taylor Swift, especially from the perspective that a lot of her songs are actually about different facets of her personality. I also do lifestyle and story times from the perspective of a late-in-life lesbian, so if any of that seems interesting to you, I have a number of other videos that I'm sure you'll like. I am still a very small channel though, so your likes, comments, and subscriptions really do help me a ton. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.